Hello, my name is Xia Cao. Today I want to show you some evidence of God's existence. I have talked about the following things in 4 videos I made before. First, atheism is unrealistic because it has not a thread of evidence that God does not exist. Second, the death knell of evolution. I used very simple biology and the probability to show that the first cell could not be formed from random chances. If there were no first cell, how can animals evolve? Third, in Use Your Brain to Know God Exists, I used logic and give examples to show behind the marvelous universe, there must be a super intelligent master and a creator, which is God. Fourth, the death knell of atheism, which shows that this universe has a first cause, which created the world. Now, on top of that, I want to show you some scientific evidence so that you know the existence of God, even though cannot be proven, but it is understandable. So let's get to the point. Let's look at a logic proposition. If the universe did not have an infinite past, under this assumption, then you can conclude that the universe was created. Why? Let's look at it. This is time, and this is now. The universe started a long time ago, but at a finite time before. Then either it had a cause, it was caused by something, or it was not the effect of any causes, meaning it came out from nothing. But for we intellects, something comes out from nothing is not believable. Therefore, it must have a cause, which you can call God, the creator, or the first cause. Now, people may object and ask, if God created the universe, who created God? This question is basically not logical, because by definition, if God needs to be created, he is not God. He is only a part of the universe. In my video on the death knell of atheism, I did a very thorough explanation, so please watch it. So far we have concluded that if the universe did not have an infinite past, it was created. Therefore, God must exist. Now let's take a look at some evidence. Nuclear can split as well as they can fuse. Both will give out a great amount of energy. Nuclear fusion from hydrogen to helium is the cause of all stars which give out light and heat, those glowing and hot planets. Our sun is one example. This is a real picture of sun, which is the great fusion from hydrogen to helium. We know hydrogen is very unstable and is the lightest element, and the helium is the second lightest element, but is very stable. Going from hydrogen to helium is very natural, but conversely, you need to put in even more energy to split helium to hydrogen. Therefore, under normal condition, the process of fusion from hydrogen to helium is not reversible. If the universe had an infinite past, all hydrogen ought to all become helium already. But we all know hydrogen is everywhere in the universe, which means the universe is not old enough. The second evidence is the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory was proposed by George Gamow in 1965. He based it on the findings of Edwin Hubble. Hubble was an astronomer. He discovered through the telescope that the distance between the planets is farther and farther apart. Therefore, the universe is expanding. Consequently, Gamow proposed that there was a Big Bang. Now, in outer space, there is a giant telescope to commemorate Hubble's achievement. We can see many scenes that our ancestors couldn't see. For instance, this is what happens when a star is dead. Even though the Big Bang theory is still a theory, it has been recognized by all astronomers and physicists. The scientists can even trace back how the original very hot temperature and high density point called singularity was like before the Big Bang. All of a sudden, it exploded. The time and space started to expand. During that process, first, the stars were formed. Then time and space kept expanding, and then later on, the planets were formed, including the Earth that we live in. Even though the Big Bang is still a theory, yet all the scientists believe there was a Big Bang. Therefore, when the Big Bang happened, that was the beginning of the universe. In other words, the universe had a start. This is the second scientific evidence. Now let's look at the first law of thermodynamics. The first law is also called the law of conservation of energy, which tells us that in normal situation, the mass and the energy cannot be created nor destroyed. According to Albert Einstein, mass and energy can convert to each other using his relativity theory, but their sum remains the same. Madame Curie was a great scientist. She was one of the 4 Nobel Prize winners who won twice. She was the first person to discover the radioactive elements. All radioactive elements came from uranium-238. Uranium has a characteristic that it keeps on splitting. When does it stop? It stops when it turns into lead. Even the half-life of uranium is very long, but it is still finite time. If the universe had an infinite past, all uranium should all become lead by now. But there is abundant uranium around, so that we have the nuclear arms race, and the North Korean dictator can still build bombs to threaten the world. What does that mean? It means that the uranium was somehow created a finite time ago. The most credible evidence comes from the 2 thermodynamic laws. The first law, the law of energy conservation that we have just talked about, the sum of mass and energy in the universe remain the same. The second law is the law of entropy, meaning in a closed system, it is from order to disorder. We can look at it from a different angle, that the usable energy in the universe is decreasing. This is very easy to understand. For instance, when we drive our cars, the energy produced from the gasoline, only 30% of them are used to push the car. The rest of them are escaped into the atmosphere, becomes unusable energy. Let's use a diagram to see how these 2 laws reveal to us. This is time, and this is the sum of mass and energy. The first law tells us that the sum of mass and energy remain the same, so it is a constant function. The second law tells us the usable energy will decrease, and one day when it becomes 0, the universe will end. Those 2 functions had an intersection point. It happened a long time ago. We can call it T sub 0. Now the question is whether before T sub 0 ever existed. If so, then we will see another 2 intersection points. What do they tell us? The usable energy of the universe was greater than the sum of the mass and the energy. That clearly was not possible. Therefore, the time before T sub 0 could not have existed. Hence, T sub 0 was the starting point of the universe. What do we have so far? The existence of God cannot be proven, but we know the universe did not have an infinite past. Therefore, there must be a God, so the existence of God is understandable. Actually, whether believing in God or atheism is a belief. Once a Christian professor came to a class, some freshman students tried to ridicule him because they knew he was a Christian. They asked, how did the universe come from? The professor very politely answered them, the universe came from God. The student laughed so loudly, saying that in this modern era, there is such backward thinking. They immediately asked him, but where did God come from? The professor answered them calmly, God was not created, God is God. The student laughed even more. Some almost fell off their chairs. So the professor asked them back, saying, Please tell me, how did the universe come from? The student said, the universe did not come from God. It came from nature. Then the professor asked, but how did the nature come from? The student replied, nature was not created. Nature is nature. Now, what's the difference from these 2 points of view? How did the universe come from? The universe come from X. But how did X come from? X was not created. X is X. They are basically the same. The only difference is the terminology. So both believing God and atheism are beliefs. If you believe in atheism, you need to have more faith because you don't have scientific evidence. When Darwin first proposed evolution, the electron microscope was not yet invented, and the DNA was not discovered. With the help of the electron microscope, we now know a living cell is extremely complex, like a sophisticated factory. Darwin based his theory only on some eye observations. His knowledge of biology was very limited compared to today's biology. What is superstitious? A belief without scientific basis is a superstition. Atheists think the theists are superstitious. But in fact, atheism is a superstition because it is a belief without any scientific basis. Therefore, it is very important that you must have an open mind. You need to look at all the facts. Don't let others fool you, and do not suppress the truth. What is the difference between wisdom and foolishness? Some people can see and know things before anybody else can. There are very few of them, and they are prophets. Most of us learn things when we are told. Hindsight always 20/20. The worst kind is those after being told and yet they still don't have a clue. But the most pity ones are those who don't want to face the reality when they are presented with all the evidence that God exists. Like an ostrich inserts its head into the sand. I hope you are not like that. There was a great man called Pascal. He said that our life in some sense is like a wager. God may exist and God may not. I can believe God exists or I can believe God does not exist. If God exists and I believe, then I win and will receive his blessings. If God does not exist and yet I believe in vain and the people will laugh at me. If God does not exist and I don't believe, that's fine and it doesn't matter. However, if God exists and I don't believe, I will lose a lot. If you put up a wager, there are two things you need to consider. First, you will pick a choice that is most likely to win. If you bet on a horse race, would you pick a horse which has never won before? Of course not. We have learned that there is much evidence that God exists, and there is not a single thread of evidence that God does not exist. Which do you choose? The second thing you need to consider is what happened when you lose. What kind of price you are going to pay. If God does not exist and you believe, you will believe in vain, so people will laugh at you. But that's like a lamp that goes out. So those people who laugh at you will be gone too. So that really doesn't matter at all. But if God exists and you fail to believe, the consequence will be catastrophic. According to the Bible, you will perish. With those two considerations, let me ask you, how are you going to select when your life is on the line? I have been debating with atheists for many years, and one very funny thing is that many are very disgusted with God. When you talk about God, they always complain about why God this and that. But if you believe God does not exist, why do you discuss with something that is not there? It is very simple, because deep down in their hearts, they know God exists. They just don't like this God at all, because someday they need to give an account of their life to their Creator. I hope you are not one of them. We often have the wrong idea that God always wants to find faults in us to punish us. On the contrary, the Bible says in Jeremiah 31:3 says, "The Lord appeared to us in the past, saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness." Also in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The God of the universe is a loving God. In the history of man, He came and did the most loving things to the mankind. I welcome you to continue to investigate what kind of God is He. In my channel, I have many other videos. I hope you will watch them. Thank you for watching, and may God richly bless you. If you have any question, please feel free to write to me. My email address is belcantog@gmail.com.